Exhibition fights completely ruin the sport of boxing. Over the last decade, we've seen a huge rise in exhibition fights, and it's fair to say that they've done ridiculous numbers by pay-per-view and have brought in some real attention to the sport of boxing. But along with a lot of viewers, they also ruin the reputation of boxers and the sport of boxing as a whole for the simple fact of more money. We've just had the announcement of two huge exhibition fights, the first being Gervonta Davis versus Jake Paul, and the second being Floyd Mayweather versus Mike Tyson. And both of these are stupid fights in my opinion, but there's a couple of reasons that I feel that these fights do more damage to the sport of boxing long term than good. And I just want to say, yes, there is definitely plus sides to these kind of fights, like bringing new eyes to the sport of boxing and making a whole lot of money for the sport. But even then, my explanation later on will show how even those reasons could be turned into a negative. Well, the main reason is simply this: fights don't live up to the hype. When we heard the announcement of Mike Tyson versus Roy Jones Jr., it was a fight between two retired greats in the sport, both of who were some of the best in their era. Now imagine this fight in their prime. It would be insane, and it would definitely be fireworks. And that's kind of how the fight was sold and promoted, as if they were in their prime and it would be an action-packed back and forth war. But we all know that when we got to the fight, it was one of the worst fights I think I've ever seen in the sport. But that's because they're two near enough elderly citizens, so we were never gonna get an action-packed fight. Just a boring fight that ended up in a draw.
World champions is a draw. Mr. Tyson, what do you think of that?
I'm good with that.
You think you won the fight?
Yeah, but I'm good with a draw.
And I can't believe that people really thought that was going to be a great fight, and I said it from the start. These two are way past their prime, way slower, and they're basically old men. This fight is not going to be like Roy Jones Jr. that you're used to seeing on TV, and it's not going to be like Mike Tyson you're used to seeing on TV. Now, I understand if this fight was made 20, 30 years ago, but for people to think that this was going to be a high IQ matchup and one that would decide who would go down in history and who would be on top, it's just ridiculous in my opinion. Now, when it comes to the Floyd Mayweather versus Mike Tyson fight, people are gonna fall for the same trick. I can already see it, when for a fact I already know this is gonna be a terrible fight, but because it's Floyd Mayweather and Mike Tyson, it will do huge numbers. But bro, why does this ruin the reputation of boxing? I'll tell you why. New faces and eyes come to the sport to see these supposed mega fights between great fighters and are simply left just disappointed. Think of this. People are coming to this thinking this is the best of the best fighting each other. People are coming to the sport, new eyes, trying to see great fights. But the actual fight never reflects that. This obviously makes the sport look terrible. Well, not always just the sport, but the fighters themselves. Let's face it, no one wanted to see Mike Tyson fight Jake Paul. Well, anyone with a brain. Because I know there were people who genuinely thought Mike Tyson would tear through Jake Paul, which is ridiculous because people are forgetting that this Mike Tyson is not this Mike Tyson. For someone with such a legendary career and legacy, this is just an easy way to tarnish your legacy a little bit. Because if you look at Mike Tyson's fights, he's beat all these great names, but lost to Jake Paul? Something's not adding up. Well, obviously I knew that before. If you watched my previous video predicting that fight, I got it spot on.
8 years old on fight night. And to be honest, I don't know how anyone on Mike's team or any of his family have let this slide, because when you're facing a fresh 27-year-old who, let's be honest, is still dangerous in Jake Paul, who is coming and fighting a pretty much old man. So Mike Tyson beating Jake Paul is probably not very likely.
Because people didn't understand that Mike Tyson is an old man now, and someone like Jake Paul who's 29 years old is gonna have no problem facing Mike Tyson. And it really didn't show too much. And like I said before, that was a pretty boring fight. And it's clear that Mike took that fight just for the money, unless he really did believe he could beat Jake Paul. Now, that is understandable to a degree because maybe he is retired and doesn't care about legacy anymore, just more money in his bank account. But this brings me on to this next fight, Gervonta Davis versus Jake Paul. Now, we've just seen the first kickoff press conference with these two, and in the face-off you can see the ridiculous size difference. Now this one's a weird one. Gervonta is literally in his prime at 30 years old and he decides to fight Jake Paul. There are so many other fights he could be taking, like Shakur Stevenson, Teofimo Lopez, or most importantly, getting that blemish back on his record. If you don't know what I'm talking about, he had a recent draw to Lamont Roach, which marked the first blemish on his record. Now, if I was him, I would be racing to get that rematch ASAP, but it doesn't seem like he's interested in any of that. Now, it is clear that Gervonta is in it to make some serious money, but what happened to achieving greatness? For someone that had so much potential and so much talent, this just seems like a terrible move. But we all know what the selling point for this fight is. Like I said before, the size. Now, considering Jake is significantly bigger than Tank, taller than him by 6 inches, and well, Jake isn't allowed to weigh more than 195 pounds on the night, and Gervonta usually fights at 135, so that's a whole 60-pound weight difference, which first of all is crazy, but second of all, I don't think that Gervonta will be weighing 135 pounds on the fight because he does cut weight usually. Obviously, he won't be cutting weight for this fight, but regardless, we can still probably see a 40 to 50 pound weight difference on the fight night, which makes people so interested to see this fight. How will Gervonta Davis, a world champion, compete against Jake Paul, who is significantly bigger than him? And like I said before, it's no secret that this fight is going to do big numbers and make each fighter a lot of money, which is clearly the motivation behind it. But we would all much prefer for Tank to continue his normal route of becoming a great fighter, but instead, he's decided he's going to fight Jake Paul. But where did all this exhibition stuff come from in the first place? Well, it all stemmed from back in 2017 when Conor McGregor, who at the time was the face of the UFC and one of the biggest names in sports period, crossed over and fought Floyd Mayweather, the #1 face of boxing. And that fight did numbers. In fact, it ranked number 2 as the highest paid pay-per-view buys of all time. And that was against Conor McGregor, someone who isn't even a real boxer. And when people saw this, it opened up so many doors for other crossover events, with influencers stepping into the scene shortly after, and Jake Paul taking the lead, fighting other UFC fighters in the ring. Basically, this showing other fighters that it's completely possible and that there is a ton of money involved, which basically led to a lot of other fighters doing this. In fact, there were even rumors at one point of Ryan Garcia fighting a retired Manny Pacquiao. Now, although that fight never fell through, this just goes to show how big these exhibition fights can really get and how big they've become. And it's kind of a shame to see the biggest pay-per-view events in boxing aren't actually real boxing fights. I don't know, I just think it's kind of weird, and we truly don't know how far this will go. But what do you guys think? Is this good? Or is this bad for the sport of boxing? Let us know in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on post notifications so you don't miss an upload. Not to mention, we also have a Patreon link in the description, so if you want to help us continue to be making videos, then please hit that link. You get access to exclusive content and much more perks. Well, anyways, that'll be all. I'll catch you in the next one.